Hey, and welcome to the BoardGame Sherpa channel. The channel takes the fear out of board gaming and puts the fun back in. Today we have a very special guest with us. Matejka is the owner and chief designer of Thunderworks Games. You may have heard me talking quite a bit about Keith and Thunderworks on this channel. Just so you know, role-play adventures, and cartographers are in my legit top 10 favorite games. And I'm not an expansion guy, but these expansions are a must-play for this. Oh, and Keith and Thunderworks do not pay me a cent to say these things. I am just legitimately a fan. So Keith, welcome to the channel.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's fun to see all that awesome stuff behind you.
Well, it's taken a few years and quite a few hits to the bank.
Yeah.
But
it took quite a few years to make those things too, so that makes sense.
We will find this out in a few minutes.
Yeah.
It's one of the early questions. Okay, so let's get started with some basic questions.
Sure.
What is your personal board game story? What got you into gaming?
Sure. What got me into gaming? So, I mean, I was, kind of my intro to board games, it was when I was very young. We played games as a family on holidays and vacations and stuff. The most memorable moment probably was, we had a babysitter that would bring over kind of games that I'd never heard of before, and some of those games are still some of my favorites and are actually still in print. So the two that I always think about is I remember playing Scotland Yard when I was very, very young, and the other one is called Survive, which I remember playing when I was very young. I still have my copy from the 80s.
Survive is the game that got me into board gaming.
Oh, that's awesome! Yeah, I play it maybe every year or so. I play it. I mean, it definitely has kind of 80s sensibilities in terms of like, I'm gonna just roll this die and throw a sea serpent on your boat and destroy all your people. Sorry, like there's those moments which are fun, but it's probably not as you don't find that kind of stuff as often in modern board games. So those are the two games that I remember playing when I was young. And then, I loved role-playing games. My sister's friends were big into D&D, so they always had their books around, and I used to look through them and had my own books. And I got to play a little bit, but I did it more just like reading as much as I could, and really kind of got into this fantasy world. So that was a big part of my childhood. And then I kind of stopped playing tabletop stuff and got big into video games. I was big into the old school systems, and then went through high school and into college. And in college, all my roommates, they were big D&D players, so we started playing role-playing games much more often. We would play at least twice a week, either like Vampire the Masquerade, like World of Darkness stuff, or D&D, or Shadowrun, or GURPS, or whatever people wanted to play. So we always had like 5 different campaigns going on. We would play at least twice a week. So we did a lot of role-playing. So that was kind of my college days. And then kind of the birth into board games proper. Board games kind of had become a thing. I had just moved to a new city. So I just moved to Madison, Wisconsin from where I had been living previously in California. And kind of 3 things converged. One, one of my really good friends, who happened to be Puerto Rican, came to my house, and he was like, "Hey, I heard this website called Board Game Geek, and the #1 game is called Puerto Rico, and I'm Puerto Rican, so we're gonna go find it and buy it, and we're gonna play it." And I was like, "Okay, let's do that." So I'd never played a Euro game before, and this, I don't know what year this was. Maybe, I don't even want to say, maybe 2007, 2008, maybe. And so we played it like 2 or 3 times. We struggled through it for the first time, but we played quite a few times over the weekend, and it was really interesting. And then the second thing was that I'd moved back to Wisconsin, and I met up with all my buddies from college, and we started role playing again. And I quickly figured out that all the free time that I had when I was in college to play these games, as an adult trying to make a living and pay bills and all that stuff, like, I just didn't have the time to play these 12-hour D&D sessions anymore. So I started looking for alternatives, and I found games like Descent First Edition was out, Arkham Horror, these kind of role playing / board game experiences, like role playing games or tabletop games that had like a narrative element to them. So I started getting to those. I was like, I can play this game in 2 hours. I can, instead of like having to play these the D&D stuff that was taking a lot longer. At least with the group that I was in, they weren't. They were all about the long sessions. And then the third thing was just I had moved to a new city and I was looking to meet people and find friends. And I found a gaming group here in town and started going every week. And I still play board games with them every Tuesday, since back in the day. So, and that group is big enough, and people are always bringing new things. So you learn new games every week. Um, so then I was in deep, right? Like I'm all in board games. This is like my life, and I had a job in which like I could listen to music or podcasts all day long while I was doing other things. And I found the Dice Tower. So Tom Vasel was living in South Korea. Him and Joe Stedman had just kind of started to do this Dice Tower podcast. Obviously, the Dice Tower has changed in many, many ways since then. But that was like my entertainment. And I think when people first enter this hobby, it's not uncommon to just like dive in and want to know everything there is to know because it's a brand new world to discover. And so I was like the board game guy, and we were started playing games on my lunch hours at work with my buddies there, and I worked at a video game developer. And at one point, we said, "Hey, we make video games all day long." And I saw Jamie Stegmaier and the late James Matthew. They were they were being successful on Kickstarter, and they were kind of doing tell-all blogs about what it takes to make a board game on Kickstarter. And of course, my naive self said, "That doesn't seem so hard. I bet we could do that." So me and my buddies, instead of playing games every day at work, we started working on new board game designs. And I just stuck with it. We kind of started to develop a process as to like how we want to kind of organize our thoughts and how we were sharing with each other and giving feedback and playing our first prototypes with each other. Eventually I'd worked one game for a long time, and then I ended up getting a little bit into production, like getting some artwork done. And that title, I decided, probably, in hindsight, I think this was very smart. Whereas like it was a big game, lots of pieces, lots of boards and miniatures and all this stuff. And I was like, for my first project, this is probably not the best scope. So I kind of took that game and I put it off to the side. And then I had played on my regular Tuesday game night. I sat down and played Reiner Knizia's Battle Line again, which I love that game, and I hadn't played it in a while. It's also called Shot and Totten. There's another name for it, but classic game, and I love Reiner Knizia's stuff. And I said to myself, well, this is a 2-player game. What would it be like if it was a 4-player game or played more players? So then I started working on the goal is to have a small box game with a deck of cards and a handful of bits, similar to that game, to Battle Line. And that's where I kind of came up with my first published title, which was called BullFrogs. And I decided to go ahead and run it on Kickstarter. And I was working with a lot of talented artists at the game developer, and I was able to kind of lean into getting some help from them. And I just went for it. And it was a successful project. It wasn't bananas, but it did well enough and sold through the first print run, and was able to. I signed it again with Renegade Games, who reprinted it with some new artwork. So, and then I started focusing on like, well, what's next? And then eventually, Role Player was the light that appeared above my head while I was playtesting some other games.
And was this the big game? Was this the big game that you would put off to the side and start and want to do a littler game?
I do have plans to do that game now.
Okay, so it's not Role Player.
It is not. So the game that I put off to the side was like a mech combat game, and I started working on it again earlier this year. So, like to the point in which I actually have some artwork for it done already. So it's going to happen. If you look at the latest the last couple Thunderworks catalogs that come in our games. There's a picture of the cover. It's called Arsenal right now. Which I don't know if that's going to be the final name, but that project keeps getting pushed out for whatever reason. Like other things take priority, but I'll put that game out eventually. You know, I still play test it, and there's still a lot that I really really like about it. So that'll come out at some point. It's just kind of maybe a lower priority than some of our other stuff.
Gotcha.
Because
Okay.
we're only Thunderworks is right. Well, for Thunderworks is only one person for many many years, me, and then during the pandemic, I hired my wife to do sales and marketing stuff, and then we brought on Kirk Dennison, who's our like logistics operations guy, and so bringing those, I was like underwater, like hardcore, trying to design stuff and do all the roles of publishing, including all the stuff that you have to do after the game comes out. And now that I brought in some more people, I've been able to move back to doing more design and development. So like as a result, this year we put out Goblin Vaults, which is a game that I designed with a friend of mine named Eric, who was actually my office mate at Raven Software when I was working on Role Player and BullFrogs at the time. So it was fun to work with work with him on a game again, because he was like my primary playtester for like a lot of those early games, including Role Player.
Oh wow. Okay. Why did you choose Thunderworks as a name?
So Thunderworks. It's interesting. I spent a long time thinking about the name of the company. I looked at what other people had done. I knew there was like some no-nos, like you don't want to like whatever your first game is, games. I like if my first game was BullFrogs, I didn't want to do like BullFrog games and then have a bunch of games that had nothing to do with frogs. And I was nervous about the decision because I like it wasn't one of those things where like it just came to me like this is it, or I came up with a list of 500 names and I said these are the best ones. I was just kind of waiting to get inspired, and that's actually a technique that happens all the time. Like sometimes I'll have a problem, or there'll be some opportunity, but I won't know exactly how to approach it. And I found that sometimes if I just wait, like the answer will come to me. But for the name, it was interesting. Right now, I have a son who's 12 years old, and he was maybe 1.5 at the time. And we went on the 4th of July, we went to the fireworks, and the big explosion went off, and my son called them Thunderworks. I was like, that's a pretty cool like name for a company, so let's just go with that. I mean, and I love the fact that like my infant son helped me name the company that's grown into what it is today.
Wow, that's actually a really cool story. Okay,
Yeah.
got a question for you. At a previous convention, you mentioned you were in a band.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? This did happen, right?
Yes, this happened. Yeah,
Okay.
music has been a big part of my life. Yeah, yeah.
And you told me your wife kind of helped you make a decision that kind of
Oh yeah, yeah.
set in motion.
So I played in bands most of my life. I play guitar and mainly bass, and I play. I went to university for music with an emphasis in recording. So I was my first job out of college. I mean, I worked many jobs during college and before college, but after college, my first internship was at a recording studio. We did a lot of recording of voiceovers for video games at the time. This was in California. Um, but I've always played lots of music in my life, and when there was kind of, I was working full time. I was doing board games on the side, and then I was also playing in a band. So we would. It was a cover band at that point. It was a cover band. We were just trying to make some money because we were all really pretty broke. But and with a cover band, you have to have a lot of material, and so we would be rehearsing at least once, sometimes twice a week, and then we'd be doing gigs, once maybe twice on the weekend, and then so I was busy, and then my wife got pregnant, and the baby's coming, and I wasn't really into designing yet for board games. I was just playing a lot. So Tuesday nights I was playing at work, and sometimes I was playtesting outside of that. So my wife is like, hey, the baby's here. You're gaming all the time, and you're playing in your band all the time. This kid needs his dad at home a lot more than you're at right now, which is a fair point, and maybe a little selfish from my perspective. And she's basically like, you should probably choose one of these hobbies and like to make some space. So I basically had to decide whether I wanted to continue playing music or I wanted to focus on board games. Mainly at the time, it was just playing board games. And I found that I enjoyed playing board games more than I did playing music at that point in my life. And so I quit the band and had some more time to help out with the kid and be a better dad. And eventually the board games grew into something that is my full-time job now. So
that's such an awesome story. I had to get to tell that one.
yeah.
Okay. Okay, so now it's no secret I love this role player series. One of the cool things here is a really cool Dungeons and Dragons type experience without all the extra work involved in having a real time session. You don't have to find people. You don't have to find people. You don't have to find a dungeon master, which is the hardest thing to find. No one ever wants to do that.
It's a hard job.
Yeah, and you get the full D&D experience without the hassles of D&D.
Right.
How did you come up with such an innovative? Again, and I know both role player and role play adventures they're saying that they're part of the whole experience, but they're two separate games. How did you come up with the innovative way of making that happen? Like for role player, you're rolling for characters, and role play adventures, you're actually using those characters to play.
Yeah, I think they were kind of two separate ideas, right? So, I've been thinking about, I had this idea of like I played a friend of mine had designed at a proto a game that we play tested at a protospiel. Protospiels are designer meetups, and like designers give each other feedback, and they happen in cities all over the country. And I always attend the one in Milwaukee and Madison, and there's one in Chicago I'd like to go to sometime, and there's one in Minneapolis I'd like to go to sometime. They're called protospiels, and there's also something called unpubs that are similar but a little different. But I was playing my buddy's prototype that he made. It was a 16 or 18 card RPG, and he had this little character creation process where you got the two cards, and you got to pick a pro, like a positive trait, and you had to pick a negative trait, and you whatever combination you wanted to, and that was your character. And then there was this role playing game where like this card represented a location, and this is an objective, and blah 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 blah. And it was fun, but I really was like the part I liked best was just like picking my character. And then this light bulb appears above my head, says, "What if the whole game was just making a character?" And so then I set off to do that. And I thought about all my role playing game experience. And like, what does it mean to make a character? What kind of things do you expect? Building up your stats and getting starting equipment, and deciding on what your backstory is and all this stuff. So I was off to the races on that. And the core, even from the beginning, the very early playtest, like there's a certain percentage of people that would say, "This game's really cool, but now I want to do something with my character." And my perspective was always, if you want to go on a dungeon crawl, go play Descent. Go play Mice and Mystics. There are a ton of games that do that. I'm trying to do something different. And like, I really stuck to my guns on it, which would probably, if I were to relive that moment, I probably wouldn't stick to my guns so tightly. But I was really convinced that like this was something cool and innovative that nobody else has done, that I have an opportunity to do something great in this space. And the way I like to explain it to people, and I don't think this helps anybody, but this is the way I think about it, is I create this analogy. At the time, Dominion was still kind of a very popular game. I mean, it's still popular to this day, but it's not like people don't talk about Dominion very much as they used to. But I always think about, whenever I played Dominion, I always felt like it was the pre-game to playing Magic the Gathering. So it's like when I play Magic the Gathering, I build my deck ahead of time, I go out and play. And then when I play Dominion, it's like I'm building my deck, but I'm not, and I think about it as like I'm not playing the game that I'm building my deck with. So I always think of like Dominion is to Magic the Gathering as my board game role player is to D&D or Pathfinder or Starfinder or whatever. So, and so then I could like kind of compartmentalize it. I mean, like, okay, this is the game I'm trying to make. Focus on this thing. I want it to be, a medium weight game. I want lots of dice, but I don't want it to be all just rolling dice. I want, this kind of dice manipulation thing was kind of a new thing. The two games that had been out that had dice manipulation in them as their core mechanic were Kingsburg, which I played again recently, and I remember liking it more than I did today. And then the other one was Alien Frontiers, and those are like the two dice games that kind of were in that vein. And I was like, I think there's space here for something different. And eventually, like after the role player Kickstarter happened, then like Sagrada came out like right after that. But and so because Sagrada and role player kind of came out at similar time periods, they're often talked about in the same sentence. But that's how that happened. But in terms of the adventures part, kind of this narrative piece, I think it was kind of like I've always loved a good story. I think people just love stories in general, and I loved choose your own adventure books when I was a kid, and I played lots of D&D and stuff. And the Ryan Lucat over at Red Raven started doing these narrative games. This was like before Sleeping Gods, but like when the first one came out, I forget what it was called. Above and Below. I think Above and Below was the first one. And I was like, whoa, this is cool, right? This is a marriage of a board game and a narrative experience. And I didn't want to make a role-playing game because as much as I played role-playing games, I love structure in my life. I like structure in my gaming. I don't want that's not where I spend a lot of my time anymore. And I just don't love role-playing games as much as I love board games. So I didn't want to create a role-playing game because if I decided I wanted to do it, I'd have to bring in a lot of help because that's not my expertise. And so I saw Ryan doing this kind of on the rails narrative experience. I was like, well, if I were going to do something, I would want to do something more like that. Fast forward a couple years, Role Player is successful. I spent at least a year trying to keep it in print because it was selling really, really well, and I didn't have any money to print more copies. But eventually that got there, and we, lots of people want to do something with their characters. So in Role Player, so I designed the first expansion, Monsters and Minions, which added combat and XP and added a fifth player and a bunch of other stuff, which is a pretty hefty expansion. Basically, just kind of answering the need, like what people want. It's like the base game is the game that I wanted to play, or I wanted to make, and then with the expansions, it's like the game that I think the fans of the game want. So, which is fine, and I like that. I like the expansions as well, but we worked on that and did really, really well. But I still wanted it to be a game about making a character. I didn't want it to be an adventuring game because that's not the game that it is. It'd be like changing the whole core of the game to something else.
Right.
So I always thought in my back of my head is like, well, I would do something like Near and Far, something kind of choose your own adventure. But I'm not a writer, and so then eventually my friend James, who is actually the guy who showed me the prototype that inspired me to design Role Player. He's like, hey, I got this idea. We could do this like narrative game where you could play your role player characters in. I was like, yeah, I've been thinking about this for a long time, but I don't really have a writer to work with. And he's like, well, I'm a writer. I was like, okay. If you want to do this, we could try this, but this is going to take a long time. Like you have to acknowledge that this is going to be at least probably 3 years of your life if you want to do this for real. And I don't really like doing things, halfway. So if I decide I'm going to do something, I do it. I'm not like most, as an aside, there's a lot of designers that will be working on a bunch of different games all at the same time. Whereas, and especially at that time, I was like singularly focused. Like, this is the game. I don't want to hear about anything else. I don't want to think about anything else. This is the game I want to make, and I'm focused on that 100% of the time. And at this time, I was that way about this game as well. And James and I started working on it, and it was fun to be working with a good friend. He had a lot of passion for it, and we worked tirelessly. And we did a ton of early playtests with prototypes to figure out like what is this game, like how much role playing do you want in this game. And early versions of role player adventures, like there were moments where it was like we set the scene, and then we tell you some things you can do, and then we tell you to like explain how you get from point A to point B. So there would be like we tried doing like pockets of role playing within this narrative structure. And we found that the people that were interested in the game tended to be board gamers. And when you give them a role playing prompt, board gamers freeze and they don't know what to do.
I see that a lot. I see that in myself.
Yeah. So all that stuff went away. So we focused more on dice manipulation for the mechanical piece, and then just making sure that the choices are super interesting and compelling. Like,
it's an amazing setup. I was like, whenever when we play the game, it's like for me it's an amazing game. But for me, it's like, my God, how'd you plan out every possible scenario? And then, especially when you added Nefer's judgment, it's like, how did you add all this and still be able to bring it all back in one game? It's as opposed to like an online thing where it's updated as it goes along. Makes sense. But you have this completely enclosed where it's like every possible situation has a resolution somewhere, and it's amazing. That's honestly the reason I love that game so much, because it's like the thought that must have went into this game and the planning. I could picture the storyboards. I could picture an entire like wall of just how this story goes.
Yeah, I mean it's there's a lot of thought, 100%, and there was many moments when we were like, man, I wish this was a video game because this would be way easier. Like just the maintain, like the tracking of information within the game, and just trying to do things in a way that makes sense with physical pieces instead of like just an integer in a table that the system is keeping track of. But most of the planning, this kind of looks into the rock a little bit in terms of I in my day jobs I'm a planner. I've got all my tasks organized, but when it comes to game design, I'm definitely more of a let's have a chat about it, and then it just lives up here. So there's a lot. I mean, there's definitely I create lists of things, but especially for like it's probably 3/4 of the way through RPA in the development of it, it was just kind of James and I talking almost every day. And at some point, we needed to get organized. I was like, okay, we need to go through and make sure every keyword is paying off the way we want it to. We got to make sure that like there's no titles that have the same names. We have to make like there's all these just thinking about all the possible like mistakes made, and then just go through the list and make sure that we like clean all that stuff up. And then we started doing a little bit more planning as we're kind of finishing it out and like doing a better job that way. So actually, when it came to Gulpax, we'd made one of these before, so we did a lot more planning. We were a lot more efficient in like creating that campaign. Although we fell into some of the same traps the second time around, and I guess that happens. But the trap that we should have known well ahead of time is that in the base game of role player adventures, for a long time, the first adventure was called Terran's Trophy, which is now the second adventure in it. And we through playtesting and through the idea of like, how am I going to demo this thing for people? We're like, we wanted to create a tutorial so that you didn't have to like memorize everything in the rule book. It was kind of a shorter experience that you can get your feet wet. And so then we ended up tacking on an adventure at the beginning, and and which turned into like a big deal. Like that, actually, the intro adventure has, because of its focus, it has like a couple of really memorable moments for people, and it had to be really good because, I mean, I think about this when we were when I was working on video games as well. It's like, for all the people that are going to play this game, they're all going to play Adventure 1, but how many of them are going to play the finale? I mean, the finale has to be good and compelling and interesting, but that first adventure has to be awesome because that's the thing that's going to compel people to keep playing it. And so we spent a lot of time kind of doing basically adding that. We called it Adventure 0 for many years, for a long time. And then at some point, we're like, we can't call this Adventure 0. We have to call it Adventure 1. So we like slid all the numbers down. And then so now when anybody asks me about role player adventures, if they tell me the adventure number, I'm gonna have no idea which one they mean because they were all different numbers. Again, we changed them. And when we got to Gulpax, it was interesting. We had our first adventure that Peter, James's brother, who brought in to work on RPA. James Ryan is the core writer and a good friend of mine. And then in the middle of RPA, we brought in his brother, who's also a writer, Peter. And so Peter wrote the first adventure for Gulpax, and through playtesting, in my mind, I was like, oh, people have played RPA, they'll just jump right in and they can keep going. And it became, it kind of, the development team kind of brought this up, and it seems obvious in retrospect of like, just because they played role player adventures maybe 2 years ago doesn't mean they remember how to play very well, or just because one person played role player adventures, maybe they're playing the expansion with a different group, but that same person owns it or something. So we kind of had to slow down. Like we were going 100 miles out of the gate. So we took that first adventure and we basically cut it in half and then turned it into 2 adventures, and which gave us a lot more breathing room to reestablish the lore and reestablish some mechanics and ease people in a little bit to get people familiar with the story and how things work. And also, I think that first adventure was a little on the long side. We tried to keep the adventures to around 2 hours, and I think that first one was a little bit long, so it helped even out the things. But when you work on these games, there's like this iterative process. I mean, with any creative art of just making things, it's always interesting to like go through. How do you get from, getting from point A to point B is not a straight line with these things, and it creates all these kind of interesting stories to tell. But anyway, I don't think I answered your question.
You absolutely did.
Okay.
But one of the really cool things about it is that you have a save game in there. Like you have an option. Like there's been months. There've been times where in playing role play adventures, there's been a month in between adventures. It's really easy to get back into it. But when we stop, you have a really cool system of saving the game. Like, you have a little tray that has all those pieces. It's just it's honestly, I can see your video game origins in this.
That's funny. I mean, so there's a system in the role play adventures series called the title cards, and title cards, they serve 2 purposes. One, they let the game remember what you did from a previous adventure. So you can just put it in the slot and then come back and then you look at your title cards. But that was actually the second reason. The original reason that I wanted to have title cards in the game, so that when people pick up in the middle of the campaign, they can look at their title cards and they kind of, it's basically like previously on Role Player Adventures. It's like, it gives you a quick update. It's like, oh yeah, that vampire did that crazy thing. It's like, oh yeah, we killed that dude. Like, you can
give you
a quick refresher on where you're at in the campaign. So yeah, that's been fun. Like, yeah, I don't know.
It does work because every time we get in, it's like we remember. It's like, oh yeah, we went bad that time, as opposed to we did the rebellious thing rather than the right thing.
Yeah,
and it was like, we remembered why we did it, and that one trigger word brought everything back.
Right. Yeah, it's fun. So I mean, the new expansion's coming out very shortly. We have it. It's on the water. The thing that's interesting about these narrative games is that when I'm showing them off, when we're running a Kickstarter, when we're doing like demos or explaining it, like so much of the fun of these games is discovering like the content. So I always don't want to tell anybody anything. I was like, just like it's hard to be like, this is really cool, trust me, and then you go buy the game like it. But I wish it were that way because I get so much joy out of seeing other people discover all the fun things that we've made for them to explore. So the thing that I'm looking forward to most probably in life right now is when Gulpax's Secret comes out and people are playing it for the first time, and then they get to discover all the cool things that we made, and they get to make difficult choices because that's what the game's all about. Like whenever if there's ever when we're working on it, we read a paragraph and we get to the choice. It's really common to say, why would I ever pick the second one? Right? It's like we try to make the choices weighed as evenly as possible because we want it to be a difficult choice and we want the players to deliberate and have discussions about why they think their character should do this X, Y, and Z. And I think that's the most fun of the game, and that's most of that is all James, right? Like I guide things along the way, but the writers on the projects do a really good job of setting up these interesting choices. And if it's an obvious choice, that's not what we want,
Right.
So it's cool.
One of the cool things about the game, again, there's a lot of cool things about the game. I'm sorry, but I'm playing with people who've played it before, and it's a completely different experience for them because I'm helping make choices that they didn't make the first couple times they played it.
Right, and
it's kind of cool.
There's this idea of we call shutting doors, right? So, and we always deliberate about whether we should shut doors or not. So it's like, okay, if you choose path A, path B is closed. Like even if you try to go back over there, you can't go there. So that means if you ever want to go see path B, you have to play it again. And it's always kind of difficult to figure out like when we should do that. I mean, there are like puzzles in adventure. If you don't solve the puzzle, you don't combine the right things, then you don't open up this location and you never saw that place. But if you go over here and explore, most of the time, if you push enough buttons, you'll be able to see most of the stuff. But there are moments where if you choose X, then this door closes and you can't, and you just can't see it anymore. We've had a couple players that like were frustrated with us because of that, but because I'm that way too when I play Final Fantasy or anything like I only plan on playing through it once, right? And I want to see as much as I can, so I'm searching every nook and cranny because I don't want to miss something cool, but I don't plan on playing it again because it's a long time and there's a lot of games to play.
Right. It's like life. It's like if you had chosen your music path, we would not be here today. We're not, and that's life. If you'd went off on that what if of if I had chosen music and had you gotten successful, it could have got like so many paths on that way. You'd never know. You'll never know what could have happened.
Right, for sure.
But you know what happened this path and it worked. Okay.
And the other thing that I dream of, I guess, is like this water cooler moment where like this guy and his group playing role play adventures and these people over here playing role play adventures, and then they get together and they talk about the game, and then it's like they're playing totally different games. So like, oh yeah, that guy was such a jerk. He's like, that guy was amazing. What are you talking about? He gave us this sweet sword. Like I want those I would just like the idea of those moments happening. This is as a tangential thing, and this is something that I reference this all the time. I used to work, before I worked at Raven Software in development, I worked at Konami Digital Entertainment and video game publishing. And I worked on many games there, but the one that I remember almost vividly was a role-playing game called Suikoden or Suikoden 3. It was the first two were on PlayStation 1, and the third one was on PS2. I mean, I'm kind of dating myself, but that game was amazing because most people have not played this game. But there's like three main characters, and at the main menu, you pick one of the three to play, and then you can stop and switch to the other characters at any time, and you can only, and each character can get like, this character can get to chapter 3 while this character is still chapter 1, but this one has to get to at least chapter 2 before this one can go to chapter 4, kind of thing. So like they're kind of I forget what that's called, where they're tethered. But the thing that's really cool about it is that you see the same moments in the game from 3 different characters' perspectives, and it's totally different, right? It's like, what is the villain? You know, they see each other as the villains, but it's, you know, you see the perspective of this villain. He feels like a hero when you're playing it, but then, and this guy feels like a hero when you're playing as him, but they hate each other and they see each other as villains and stuff. So just the whole idea of, you know, one event can be seen from many different perspectives. And I just would love to see players have that feeling when they talk to each other about role-play adventures as well.
That's cool. Okay. As you know, I'm a complete fan of roleplay, so I don't want to. And Gen Con's coming up, so let me stop my fanboying. Let's talk about Gen Con.
Yeah.
What do you have coming out for Gen Con?
Okay, so I'm going to ramp up to that. So right now we have Stone Spine Architects from the designer of Cartographers dungeon building drafting game on Kickstarter right now. That ends in about 10 days, I believe. And then we slide into Gen Con, right? So then off to Gen Con, we'll be featuring Dawn of Ulos, which is our fantasy economic game in the world of role player that from Jason Lentz. That's just coming out. It's fantastic. You should check it out. And then after Gen Con, you know, then we're getting files ready to get Stone Spine to the printers and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of new, like customer facing stuff, we have a Kickstarter launching November 1st. So it's November 1st through November 21st. It was going to be October 31st, but I was like, let's not launch the Kickstarter on Halloween. But the day after Halloween, we're going to launch our Kickstarter. Just because, like, when I'm taking my kid out trick or treating, I don't want to be worried about Kickstarter too much.
Gotcha.
So so that game is called Metro Runner. It is from a designer who's actually local to me and is also my graphic designer named Stephen Kerr. It is a cyberpunk kind of it's a puzzly cyberpunk medium weight Euro game. I would say it's a little heavier than Role Player. So for Thunderworks stuff, it's a little bit on the heavier side. But it features like a 3x3 grid of these really cool tiles in the center of the board that kind of look like Suro tiles that represent like hacking. So you're going around Mirror City, picking up jobs. You're basically like a hacker character. You're picking up jobs. You're delivering. It's not a pick up and deliver game. It's a resource management game where you're like collecting different resources to complete jobs, and at the same time you're doing hacking. You hack the system to get credits, which allow you to take bonus actions. It plays 1 to 5 players. I mean, it's a 60 to 90 minute game. It's kind of in that Eurogame sweet spot for me. Like, I love Eurogames, and like anything over an hour and a half, I start to get a little weary of it. So, hour and a half. It's really cool. It's, you know, it's going to have some really kind of cool translucent kind of sci-fi looking, matrix looking busts that you, as your pawns that you move around the board. The board is basically a string of spaces, and you know you can move forward 1 or 2 spaces each turn. You can always spend resources to move forward, but you always move clockwise around the ring. It's like the train line around the city, the metro. And then whenever you're in a district, because the board is kind of split into districts. Whenever you're in districts, you've got certain actions you can do in the district, or you can do that action in your space that you go to. But it's got a little bit of engine building in it. So as you finish jobs, finishing more jobs is cheaper, and you're tracking your notoriety on the bottom of the board, and then also kind of like your influence within your borough, your section of the city that's your hometown. So yeah, it's really cool. It doesn't look like anything I've ever done before.
Okay, cool. And that's Metro Runner.
Metro Runner, yeah. It's actually, if you go to, let me double check. I think it's Metro Runner. I think it's MetroRunnerGame.com. We have a landing page that has some artwork on it.
Okay.
And then you can sign up to. I just gotta double check this.
So that kickstarts November 1st.
Yeah, we just set the Kickstarter date on Tuesday, so that's as hot off the presses.
Hot off the presses. Yeah. I'm giving you news. I'm giving people right at the presses.
Yeah. So MetroRunnerGame.com is the landing page for it. We don't have it. I don't think it's on BGG yet, but it will be like soon after GenCon.
So wait, I got an exclusive before BGG.
That's right. Oh, what does BGG know? You got to go to the Sherpa if you want to know the latest stuff.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to hear.
So, so that's the big one. That's kind of closing out the year for us. And then into 2024, we'll be delivering Stone Spine in the spring. April is what the current date is. And then Metro Runner will deliver for GenCon in August. And then we have another. Usually, right now, our plan is to do 2 Kickstarters a year plus 1 straight to retail. So that's what we did this year. We're going to try it again next year. This year we had Goblin Vaults, and then was the straight to retail, and then we've got Dawn of Ulos and the Roleplay Adventures expansion. And then next year it'll be the 2 delivering will be from Kickstarter is Stone Spine Architects, Metro Runner, and then we're going to have a 3rd straight to retail title, which I can't tell you what it is.
But will the Sherpa be the first to know?
We're going to keep our fingers crossed on that.
We're not gonna.
I'll tell you a little bit. I'll give you a little dirt. It is not a role player world game.
Okay. Is there such a thing in Thunderworks?
Yeah.
Everything. I mean, Cartographers.
Cape May right there.
Cape May. I forgot about Cape May.
So there's Cape May, Tenpenny Parks. Dual Powers Revolution 1917, which is an older title, which I really like that game, but that is out of print, and I don't know if it'll come back. And then it's got to be something else. And Bullfrogs, I guess, but Bullfrogs I could slide into the fantasy stuff. We could make that if I ever reprint Bullfrogs, I'll probably make it officially a World of Ulos game.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, okay. One cool thing I meant to ask you: the artwork on all these games is amazing. Is it intentionally consistent throughout everything? Like the artwork is just amazing.
Yeah, so the roleplay world stuff is intended to be similar. It's supposed to live in the same kind of space. I do all the art direction for all our projects, so I'm the one, talking to the artists and giving them reference and telling them to make this jacket blue instead of red or whatever, or that this is to whatever. So I have a hand in that, but I'm not the artist.
Okay.
The original artist for Role Player is named J.J. Arioso, and he did Monsters and Minions, almost everything in Monsters and Minions. And then there's been a few others, like the person who does Cartographers is named Lucas, and he has done all of Cartographers, but he also did all of Lockup, and he did all of with the expansion as well. And then there's a new artist that we're working with named Diego, and he did Goblin Vaults, and he did a bunch of stuff in Fiends and Familiars. And he did, I don't know, he's doing a bunch of other stuff that's coming up. He did some roleplay adventure stuff, and Lucas did some roleplay adventure stuff. Damien M, he did all the maps for roleplay adventures, and he did Stone Spine Architects. He did the cards. So he's a great cartographer. Like he does maps for a lot of different games, including like Brass, the newest version of Brass, and he's done a bunch of stuff for Starfinder. And I mean, for artists, usually since I play a lot of games, I see stuff that I like, and then I just reach out to them and I say, hey, I got a project. This is what I need. Are you interested? How much do you cost? Basically, give me a quote. If you like the way Thunderworks games look, it's because that's the kind of artwork I like. And so that's the kind of artwork that I want on my games. So with the new Metro Runner one, this is an artist we had never used before. And this is just an artist that we found on ArtStation. We dig around, find 10 artists that we think are cool, and email them. In the modern world, there's the market's wide open. There's
those random emails work out really nice.
that's what if you just it doesn't hurt to ask, right?
Right.
And you have an international market, right? So there's artists all over the world we can access now.
And you can, and I mean, you're in Wisconsin, I'm in New Jersey. Zoom helps bring everyone together.
That's right. I mean, I think Illustrator wise, I've only used one American illustrator on any role player or any Thunderworks title.
Oh,
everybody else is Brazilian, or like Vincent Dutray is French, but he lives in South Korea, or like or I don't even know where they are. Right? As long as you can deal with the time zone difference, it's easy.
Is there anything about GenCon that I missed that you wanted to finish up on?
At GenCon, if you're going to be there, we'll have the designer of Ulos there doing demos and signing stuff, and the designer of 10 Penny Parks will also be there. So we're bringing a few of our designer friends with us, and we're going to have a couple surprise sweet deals at the show for some of our older titles. So if you've got stop by the booth and check out some sweet deals.
I'm going broke, aren't I?
Probably not.
I have a lot, so it's like, but yeah, I've already committed to lockup. Like these games, I did a video just called "The Hottest Games of GenCon."
Yeah,
and I posted on Ulos and a bunch of it said, "You really need to check out Lockup," and I'm like, I'm gonna go broke with your company.
You should, you should pick up Lockup at the show. I should tell you that.
That's the plan.
Okay.
Okay. So, what's your favorite thing about GenCon? Everything of all things. I mean,
it's my favorite thing about GenCon is just it sounds cheesy, but just like seeing my people, like seeing fans of our work, talking to people who have been enjoying our games. Like it's inspiring, right? When I sit at my desk, I type emails, I create documents, I do some play testing. Sometimes I feel you lose connection to the people that you're making these things for, because so I just like getting out there and meeting people who are excited about what Thunderworks is doing. And when somebody comes up to me and says, Role Player Adventures is my favorite game of all time, it's like it gets me,
Okay, that's
awesome. I love talking to the fans, and I just like the chaos of it all as well. It's like it makes you feel like you're part of a community, right? So that's nice.
So anything you'd like to add that I haven't asked you?
Okay, so stop by the Thunderworks booth, 2539 at GenCon. We've got a bunch of new titles to show off. Dawn of Ulos. If you haven't seen Goblin Vaults, we'll have that. And we'll have a copy of Stone Spine showing off. Stone Spine Architects obviously will come out in April, but we'll have a copy there to show off, and because we'll still be accepting people late pledges on our pledge manager. And if you ever feel free to reach out to Thunderworks at any time. We're easy to get a hold of at thunderworksgames.com, or we've got a World of Ulos Facebook page for the fans to chat about the Thunderworks games that are fantasy. Or you can always hit me up on Twitter or at ThunderworksGAM, because I ran out of characters when I made that username. But yeah, just thanks for having me on, and thanks for everybody for checking it out.
All right, and thank you for coming on. All right, thanks to all of you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and share if you can. And I'll be checking out all the new and upcoming stuff at GenCon. I'll see you next episode.